what Extinction Rebellion is doing is really like trying to reclaim a 20th century civil resistance model, which the radical left doesn't like engage with for 30 years, you know, quite understandably, because it's very ambitious.
There's a critique that says that we're too focused on arrest and jail time, and I agree actually, and we've had that internal discussion and there's a variation of opinions there, so depending on who's in front of a camera you're going to get a different version of it.
There's maybe 3 reasons. First of all, you're so pissed off, you're outraged, you want to break the law to make a point, okay? Another reason is more instrumental, which is the more arrests that happen, as a general principle, the more embarrassed the authorities will be because they're shown to be oppressors, as you might say. They're shown to show their true colours. And that's related to the third reason, which is in non-violent social conflict, a central mechanism is that people get arrested and people come out in support because they're emotionally affected by that. And I think if those people are going to go through that degree of sacrifice or whatever, then I will do it as well. And so it's a recruitment mechanism.
It's not necessarily to get arrested, because the idea with any good protest that you set it up as a dilemma, either they arrest you and you get the story that way, or you get away with it and you get the boost of the fun of getting away with it. I was telling you this story about on the Lambeth Bridge when people stayed and refused to move even at the end of the day, and the police ended up offering them anything to move on. Eventually bought one of them a gin and tonic to get them off the road. So there's something about that will and that determination that's really important.
I think a key misunderstanding, of people criticise us talking to police is they think we're going to the police to ask permission, and we're not. Just put that on the record. We say we're blocking the bridges and we're coming to let you know so that you can fulfil your public order function, as it were, of making sure there's not accidents and people aren't put into undue risk.
I think the idea is that the police are then more likely to go, OK, well, one of our duties is to uphold the right to protest. These people seem genuine, they seem well organised. It's not our issue if they've got a problem with the government. I mean, maybe a lot of the police have got a problem with the government.
The police generally, as I see it, will be violent towards protesters when the situation is disorganised and or violent, you know. I mean, obviously they may provoke it, but that's another kettle of fish. But in our experience in XR of doing what you might call discipline non-violence, then the police response is, as we've seen, which is, you know, they won't arrest people, or if they do, they'll arrest people in a reasonably organised fashion.
The police could do things like tear gases or do mass arrests in a really brutal way. People's lives can be really sabotaged behind the scenes as well. I mean, those of us that are main organisers are especially taking that risk. But the idea, again, from the sort of social change theory is that if the police turn, then that brutality creates a response in the movement which brings more people on the streets.
The other thing to say is, like, Extinction Rebellion is a rebellion, right?
We say in our documents we're organising a rebellion, not a school trip, you know, I mean...
So if you want to get involved in a rebellion, there's risks involved.
But equally, if we just focus on the risks in a really kind of paranoid and heavy way, then nobody's going to come out, are they? So we've got to kind of find a balance with that.
If you don't want to get involved, then don't get involved. You know, no one's being forced to do it. But the reason people are involved in a rebellion is because everything's so fucked up. And they want that change, and people are prepared to take that risk.
What really worries me is that I'm part of the environmental movement. I've been a guest at the front lines of like anti-fracking sites, and what people need to know there when they go to those camps is that the police have behaved terribly. I mean, there's a Netpol report about what's happened up at Preston New Road. And there's a culture there of being really, really careful around the police, because if you get chatting to them at Preston New Road, they're pumping you for information, and if you're naive, you could easily tell them some information about the camp that makes life really difficult for people on the camp. And I think that's a problem with Extinction Rebellion, is that because we've been all open, and there are people clearly on camera talking to the police, we're undermining years of work from people like Green and Black Cross and Netpol, where they want activists and people new to protest to know that the police aren't on your side, that they're looking for information from you.
We're in 2019 in London with the Metropolitan Police. It might not even apply to Manchester, or definitely doesn't apply to Egypt. Do you know what I mean? We're talking about a particular situation.
Anybody who comes into environmentalism and protests through Extinction Rebellion and then maybe goes to a fracking site is going to need to be re-educated. And so I just apologise if we're causing a problem like that. I understand it. And we are going to be having a meeting with GBC and Netpol and others, or at least we've invited them to a meeting to talk about these things. But hopefully people can also see that something different has to happen.
The interests of the police are not coincidental with the interests of the elite. And this is like central to non-violence theory, classical non-violence theory in the 20th century. And this is the idea, is that when the security forces are demoralised or start to defect, that's when structural change happens or the regime collapses. So this is a completely different sort of logic, if you see what I mean. You don't have that reductive idea that the police is the state and the state is the police. No, no, no. Like, sociologically speaking, that's really simplistic. You know, you need to see the police, you know, as they are now, basically victims of austerity, right? You know, they've had the pay decrease, you know, they've got really shitty jobs, no one likes them, you know, no respect, no autonomy, this, you know, the classic neoliberal accounting sort of regime that, you know, goes across all institutions of society now. And, you know, I've been arrested 10 times the last 2 years. Every time you're arrested, you know, the police people will come up to you and say, oh, you know, what you're doing is great. And, you know, being a police person is a shitty job. And, you know, they just want to complain to you about it. And that's not because you're trying to do some big radical thing on them. It's because they are genuinely pissed off.
There's the possibility that when the shit really hits the fan, if the police were instructed to shoot people, which could happen, right, or the military, that maybe they won't, because maybe we've had that conversation with them about what we're trying to do and what the government's not doing. So it's a long shot, but that has happened in other countries.
If you look at historically in how regimes fall, you know, or structural change happens, it's mainly because, you know, the elites basically hollow out the state and they hollow out the security forces, you know, due to their own greed and stupidity. So never think that the elites are particularly clever. They're not, you know, they become progressively more stupid. And we've got a particular stupid elite, you know, which are leading us, you know, to the death of our species. So it's they're perfectly capable of destroying their own protection.
There's a guy that follows a lot of activists around, one of these special officers. I've seen him at Heathrow Airport, I've seen him at a fracking site, I've seen him in Wales at a coal mine, so he specialises in this. And I went and asked him the other day, I said, you know, have you got kids? He said, yeah, I have. And I said, do you know what we're talking about? Do you know how bad it is? And he said, yeah. And I felt that compared to other times I've seen him, I felt a softening in this person. I might be wrong, I might be being naive. I wasn't giving him information about anybody else, I was just having a conversation with him. And I think there's another desire in Extinction Rebellion to see the police as people, and that doesn't mean that we're naive, that they're not an institution. I mean, I'm actually personally involved in a complaint against the police to do with perjury in a court case. I've had my van pulled over and stopped for really made-up reasons. So I know what the police can be like. And I know that other activists have had a far worse time and black communities have had a far worse time. So I don't think any of us are saying the police are all lovely, but we're also willing to say there's individuals there and then that there's the possibility that they may be in agreement with us.
I really like the quote from Chris Hedges, who says, like, words to the effect that successful mass movements are basically alliances of people that hate each other but get together for the common good. Extinction Rebellion necessarily is an alliance, it's a broad church. So you have got people that are into bringing sort of NGOs into the alliance, as you might say. Then you've got, you know, you've got radical anarchisty type people, and you've got sort of mainstream green people. And, you know, there's tensions, right? There's no point pretending otherwise. And, you know, welcome to democracy, there's always tensions. But, you know, the idea, the gambit is you bring these people together, and what they all have in common is everyone's shitting themselves because something structural has to happen. And, you know, we've been very surprised, for instance, that people from the NGOs are actually genuinely terrified, you know. And that changes everything, like Naomi Klein says, you know. This changes everything. Keep keep criticising us for it. That's what I say. Yeah.